Yeah, we usually do a lot of crime news, don't we? We haven't had any crime news. I wonder if this pandemic is affecting it.
I think it's just been sort of on the back burner.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm wondering is, has this actually caused a decline in crime? Or is it just that, we've got bigger, more important things to talk about? Let's talk about it with Tarleton State Criminal Justice Professor Alex Del Carmen. Alex, good morning. What do you think?
Good morning, and thanks for having me this morning. Well, the answer is actually mixed, right? In some cases, we've seen a decline of crime substantially across the United States, and the Dallas-Fort Worth area is no exception to that. In other cases, we've seen actually an increase. So if you look at burglaries, for instance, we've seen a sharp decrease in burglaries. We've seen a sharp decrease in DWIs. And as you can imagine, since police officers are making an attempt not to stop folks who are enforcing traffic, we've seen a decline in those as well. But the increase has been evident in the context of domestic violence.
Yes, and violence against children. A lot of social service agencies are worried that children are now stuck at home and can't go to school, and they're becoming victimized.
That's exactly right. So one of the things that we see, and we saw since we had this shelter-in-place orders across the United States, is we've seen an increase, a sharp increase, actually, in some cases 20 to 30% increase of domestic violence cases, and in other cases up to a 40% increase on reported cases of child abuse. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon across the United States, but it stands to reason that once you remove the potential offender and victim from the streets and you put them in a close quarter inside a home and you force them to stay there, you would have such incidents take place.
Yeah, I would imagine that stress plays a big part in that too. I mean, you have people who most of us, I think, talk in terms of being kind of bored at home, just sitting around doing nothing with the family. On the other hand, there are families that have some poor dynamics that can cause trouble by their forced togetherness, I guess. How about police departments? Are they being overwhelmed that you can find with the restrictions and the need to try to stay separated and distanced from people?
Right. So law enforcement is actually having to face the challenge of what to do if their personnel get sick, right? In some cases, as we've seen in Houston, in Dallas, in Fort Worth, we've seen some police officers that are being quarantined. And so that reduces the manpower that police officers may have in place in order to be able to deploy officers at a given time. In addition to that, you have to have protocols in place when you go to a home that you suspect coronavirus is actually in place. And so they have to, obviously wear the N95 mask, they have to wear the gloves. And so it's a real challenge for them to be able to do their job. And on top of that, take care of their families. We once again see how first responders are being tasked with this monumental task. And none of us, I think, across the United States were ready or had even envisioned something like this ever happening.
Because so many people are out of work or have, had their hours reduced, do you think once this is all over and everyone's back to work that certain crimes are going to go back up, maybe even more than they were before because people don't have money to buy things?
There's no question, right? But the correlation of not buying things and being able to commit crime, although it's there, but we're not actually sure what the causal effect of that is. But what we do know is that once you put people back in the streets again, and once we have the potential victim or the potential offender or both, interacting with one another, we're going to see a spike of crime because obviously crime has gone down substantially. So it only has one way of going from this point further, and that's going up once things resume. Having said that, we just don't know at this point how low it's going to get in some cases and how high it's going to be in others if the pandemic and this particular, self-quarantine continues for months to come.
All right. Alex, thank you very much. We always enjoy talking with you, and you give us some great information. Here's Alex Del Carmen. He's a criminal justice professor at Tarleton State.